Hey everyone, it's your friend and colleague Jesse Green. You're tuning in to another episode of the Savvy Dentist podcast. Wonderful to have your company, as it always is. Now, in the last episode, we spoke about retention and how to plug leaks in your customer journey pipeline. Today, I want to talk to you a bit about conversion and specifically some of the language skills that are going to help you present your treatment in the most effective way to get it accepted. I guess before we get into the language skills, it's important to understand why patients come to see us. They come to see us because they have a problem and they want a solution to that problem. What's really important to understand is that that problem needs to be serious enough for the patient to want to invest in a solution. So we need to make sure that when we're describing the clinical condition to the patient, that we are talking about the problem and mentioning the consequences of not treating it, because in the eyes of the patient or in the mind of the patient, they might think it's a small deal when we know that left untreated, that could become a major problem for them down the track. I don't know about you, but I've had lots of patients that have come in and you've presented treatment. They say, I have no pain, I have no symptoms. Are you sure I really need this? And so we need to make sure that we're educating patients about the situation that's going on in their mouth. Now, assuming that we've done that, we also need to understand another factor, and that is that people make their buying decisions emotionally. They don't typically buy on logic. They need logic to justify the purchase, but they make their decisions emotionally. And we see this all the time. Whether it's buying dental services or anything else, people make their decisions emotionally and justify it with logic. So I happen to be an Apple Mac user. I love Apple Macs. Yes, I know I could get a PC cheaper, but I happen to just love Macs and the Apple ecosystem. And I justify it by saying I'm familiar with it, or it's faster, it's this or it's that. But the reality is I could do the same thing on a PC. And you see, people do it with clothing purchases. How many pairs of shoes do you need? Well, these ones look slightly different for this particular occasion. Or if you see older guys wanting to look tough on Harley Davidson motorbikes in their mid-40s because they're having their midlife crisis, that is often an emotional decision too, but we will justify it with logic. The same thing happens in dentistry. But what we need to do is to understand what are the emotions that are driving the decision-making of our patient. And so the way that we uncover that is by having a conversation with the patient at the beginning of the consultation. So if you're new to this, you've got to resist the urge to dive head first or hands first, as the case may be, into the patient's mouth and start doing the examination. You want to have a conversation with them, which we call a fireside chat, to uncover what's actually driving their behavior. What are they motivated by, or what are they concerned by? Are they wanting to look good for their daughter's wedding, or are they concerned about being able to keep their teeth for life? Whatever it happens to be, we've got to uncover that, and we do that by asking some intentional questions and really actively listening. But once we've figured out what that emotional motivator or concern is, we've got to find a way of linking the clinical need that we can see and observe in our clinical examination to the emotions that the patient has conveyed to us. And the way that we do that is with a want-need statement. And a want-need statement is something I learned very many years ago when I was learning to sell, doing door-to-door sales, selling direct marketing through Amway and the like. My mentor at the time, a fellow called Peter, taught me this particular skill set. And a want-need logic is where you discuss what the patient wants first, and then you tie the clinical need to it. And so you might say, so that you can look good for your daughter's wedding, I'm going to suggest we veneer the front 6 teeth or whatever it might be. Or so that you can look good for your daughter's wedding, I'm going to suggest we replace that stained restoration with a new one. Or so that you can look good for your daughter's wedding, I'm going to suggest that we whiten your teeth, or whatever the case may be. Now, what's really important to understand is, the emotional motivator and the clinical need might seem hard to relate at first, and we've got to use some creative language to link those two things together. So that you look good for your daughter's wedding, I've got to crown that upper right 6, is not something you'd normally kind of link the two things, but we need to find a way to link those things, and we do that by providing the logic, okay? So if I go back to the obvious examples, so that you can look good for your daughter's wedding, I'm going to suggest we put some veneers on your front 6 teeth. The logic piece is now those veneers will look natural in the cameras and the photos will be amazing and they'll look wonderful for years to come. And so that's the obvious one, right? But what you might say when it comes to the upper 6 is, look, so that you can look good for your daughter's wedding, I'm going to suggest we put a crown on the upper right-hand molar. And the reason that's important is because that upper right-hand molar is the buttress tooth that provides a lot of support so that the front teeth don't get overloaded. And that way, those teeth won't chip and break in the meantime, and they're going to be intact for your daughter's wedding. Now, of course, I've just run that off the top of my head, and you'll find better language than that, but you get the gist. You link the clinical need to the emotional want, and they may or may not be easily related, but you must provide the logic at the end. So there's a want, need, and a logic piece to that. And the logic piece is really important because if you don't provide that and you understand that people are just buying on emotions, you still need the logic because that's what prevents buyer's remorse. If you don't put that in, you risk having people regret that purchase, cancel treatment before it goes ahead, and so on. And if you've ever experienced buyer's remorse, it's typically because you've made an overtly emotional purchase and you haven't had the logic to back it up. Now, hopefully that's a small purchase if you've experienced that and not a large one like a house or a car or something major like that. But, you get the gist. When you master these skills, and they're fundamental skills, what it's going to allow you to do is to have confidence in your case acceptance. And what that allows you to then do in turn is to have confidence in the revenue that you're going to generate day in and day out in your practice. So the financial security of your business becomes much more predictable, much more sustainable, much more repeatable. And in addition to that, that patient journey that we spoke about last week is enhanced too, because the patients will often say to you, wow, Jesse, it's the first time anyone's ever really listened to me. Thank you for taking the time to hear my point of view or to understand, what's important to me. So you get that double benefit of that as well. But just talking about the business benefit for a minute, that sustainability and predictability of your income allows you to know with clarity, with certainty, what your revenue is going to be. And once you have predictability around your revenue, you can manage your business very, very actively. You can pull the levers in your business to increase that revenue, increase your profitability. And when you do that, and you multiply that out across the practice so that your associates are using these skills too, you all of a sudden have a business that's providing you income as well as time. And that gives you an income that supports your lifestyle and the time to enjoy that. And that's where you start creating a true business, not just a job in a dental practice. So when you run your business really actively, it allows you to take charge of other elements of your life. It creates the time so you can spend time with your family, with your friends, your hobbies, and all the rest of it. So teaching these skills to your associates is really critical and key to creating leverage in your business. So how do we transfer skills to the associates? It comes back to having a system that you can teach. Now, one of the things that I learned when I was learning to sell was that scripts are a bit fraught. The problem with scripts, as I see them, as I've experienced, is that as soon as the patient or the prospect, if you're not in a dental environment, says something that's not in the script, all of a sudden you're lost in the conversation. So I prefer conversational frameworks. A conversational framework gives you enough structure to ensure you get an outcome, but providing enough flexibility to allow the conversation to flow naturally in its normal way. A conversational framework can be easily taught because what it allows the other associates to do is to insert their own language rather than try to parrot your words as well. So they have the structure and they have the flexibility. And we call that freestyling within a framework. So the framework will have several key components. It's going to have a greeting to it. It's going to greet the patients that come into the room. It's going to have some questions that you're going to ask upfront, questions to explore. It's going to involve really listening to what the patient says and reflecting back what they say so the patient A, feels heard, and B, you're testing your understanding. And then what you're going to want to do is test for acceptance. As you go through your want, need, logic statements, you want to test for acceptance and ask the patient, how does that sound to you? Or would that work for you? And what you're doing is you're gently testing to see if the patient is going to have objections that come up. And if objections then come up, you're going to have a couple of different ways of handling those objections so that the patient can understand that, these things come up all the time and other people just like them have felt that way, thought that way, and still been able to proceed with the treatment. So please understand when it comes to objections, we're not talking about using Jedi mind tricks to convince people to have treatment they don't want or they don't need. It's just about treating patients with respect and trying to understand what the concerns are that they have about proceeding with treatment. And if we can address those concerns and they proceed with the treatment that we know that they need, then we're doing them a great service. All right, gang. So before we wrap up today, I want to come to a question that's come from Lisa in Brisbane. And Lisa's asking, Jesse, when I present treatment, sometimes I feel like I'm being a bit salesy. And I understand that that's a concern that many dentists have. No one wants to be that guy or that girl that, feels like a douchebag. The reality is when you're offering treatment, we need to understand from where we're coming. And it's about being on purpose rather than being on task. And our purpose is to help our patients have the treatment that we know that's good for them. If we're recommending treatment that we know that's not good for them or is in our interest rather than theirs, that's where our ethical dilemma arises. Please don't do that. Never present treatment to patients that is not clinically appropriate or indicated. You want to make sure at all times that your treatment that you're offering is in the best interest of the patient. And that will go a long way to helping you alleviate that feeling of salesy. Now, beyond that, it's just practicing the frameworks. It's about practicing the conversation so it feels natural to you. And that's just coming back to repetition. In Savvy Dentists, we have an expression called 100 dirty reps. And you want to practice this 100 times. And for the first handful of times, it'll feel weird, it'll feel awkward. But after a period of time, it starts to feel a bit more natural. You get a bit better at it. And after about 100 times, you'll feel that that is just a conversation that you're very comfortable having. So again, the two key things to not feel salesy is to remember that it's always in the patient's interest. And secondly, it's about practicing those frameworks over and over and over again until it just rolls off your tongue like you're talking to a lifelong friend. All right, gang, that's it from us this week. I hope you have a great week ahead and look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the show. Take care now. Hey, everyone, it's Jesse here. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the podcast. If you're looking for some more tools, some more insights, some more inspiration to help you create a practice that you love, as well as a life that you love, well, head across to savvydentist.com and check out all the goodies that we have there waiting for you right now.